Gabe, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
For those who don't know, Gabe is part of a short-selling, I suppose you could call it an outfit?
Yeah, outfit works.
Yeah, it's you've, I suppose, shot to fame in the last few years. Your research has gone across international lines and caught wind over in different parts of the world. We'll get to later on the show.
Definitely.
But I think this is your first podcast recording, right? Interview?
Yeah, this is my first podcast. So gonna get Viceroy on the map, and hopefully there's a few more to come.
Yeah, cool. It's I've been eagerly awaiting this because, one, this is the first show you've done, but two, for those in the investing community and those who have seen or followed along with your work from a distance, I've always been eager to find out more about who's responsible, who's behind this, who's producing this research. So I'm really excited to bring this to the market, if you like.
Yep.
And to learn more about everything that's gone on in the past, say, 5 years, because it's a hell of a story. We've met before.
Yep.
And you shared some great stories with me, so I'm just hoping we can flesh some of those out today.
Yeah.
What we normally do is we start with you and just go back to where it all started for you, your journey towards finance. Yes, exactly. So why don't you just tell us about that, your family life and how you got started in finance?
Sure. So I didn't really have any idea what I wanted to do after high school. And I think my mum pointed out to me, oh, there's these professional services firms, Big Four, and a couple of, boutique ones that take in cadets, which is also, I guess, a secondment, I guess. And the idea is that you study part-time, work full-time in professional services for the first 2 years, and then you study full-time and work, if you want, I guess, for the remainder of your course. And I was kind of weighing up between commerce and engineering, and I didn't have a preference, but I applied for these jobs and thought okay, if I get this job, I'll do business, that's fine. I'll do commerce. And I got a cadetship with Ferrier Hodgson. So I started there 18, fresh out of high school. And it just kind of went from there. And working in insolvency, I guess, is sort of...
So it's the end goal is to be an auditor, or that's the title you come out with?
It was mostly just... I had to study accounting. Okay. And they're a CA... Well, they were a CA firm that just got bought out by KPMG. Okay. But the idea was not auditing or tax. It was more, corporate recoveries, liquidations, administrations, and also just general debt advisory, turnover advisory, anyone that's sort of struggling, trying to get them back on track. So it broadened up this spectrum of all these different types of businesses. And I think on my first day, there was a potential that I would have had to go out and give redundancies letters out to truck drivers or something. Wow. So I was terrified.
You're 18, 19?
I was 18, yeah.
Oh,
and I thought, well, this is a little bit potentially, I don't actually know how I could do this respectfully. I had no idea what I was doing at inception. I hadn't even done accounting in high school. But fortunately I got pulled off that. I did the training to how to talk with creditors and stuff, because it's kind of soul crushing working in insolvency, because most of the time, especially for the first 2 years, all you do is tell people that they've lost their money. You're on the phones all the time. You're handling claims, and a lot of them were mom and dads. And there's even businesses that kind of went through that, just had a bad run of luck. It wasn't really, they weren't fraudulent. It was just bureaucracy even. So I worked in insolvency for a few years, and it's kind of ironic that I went from, sort of the back end of looking at how some companies were definitely fraudulent. I mean, that's with all insolvency. And how that plays out, looking back to now trying to find out, picking these companies before this event happens is really challenging, especially when you don't have all that information. I had management accounts, for example, at Ferriers, and I could review them all going back, whatever. But when you're limited to just public accounts, you actually have to do a lot of the digging yourself in terms of actually getting primary empirical data to substantiate any claim you're making.
Presumably, though, that's, if you are going to move into what you ultimately did, that's great exposure, right?
It was, yeah. It was yeah, because I think it brings some perspective to what we do as well, because there's this huge sort of backlash against short sellers. It's like, oh, you're putting people out of business, you're ruining their lives. People obviously lose their jobs. But I guess, at least in my experience, it was sort of better to rip off the Band-Aid earlier rather than sort of become this massive infectious wound, right? And I don't think people sort of get that we kind of know that this will happen eventually, but it doesn't really faze us anymore.
Okay. So before we get to more of the nitty-gritty stuff, why don't you take us through the period of, you've just left high school.
Yep.
The further study that you did and what you were working on the side and how that came to be.
Sure. So the first 2 years I was basically just working at fairs. And it was everything from like bookshops to cafes to bars. I think there's even a strip club thrown in there somewhere. And then I sort of wound up those 2 years working full-time, studying part-time. And kind of, I took an internship at a fund, only because they were sort of mildly interested that I worked in insolvency and they had a bit of a short book. So I helped them out with some stuff, just, digging on certain companies. I pitched them a couple of short reports. These were international, so I had no sort of conflict with what I was doing at Farrier's. It was just sort of the idea generation on sort of what we can expect, 6 months prior to a collapse. So when I came back and I knew how difficult it was for these funds to get data in Australia, I started when I was in uni just, reaching out to funds and saying, look, you might have a good thesis in Australia. Our market's really different. Everyone thought it was very archaic. I mean, we still had like JB Hi-Fi and Harvey Norman's, where in the US, Best Buy was collapsing. This was back in like 2014, 15.
Yeah.
And I essentially just pitched that I would do the due diligence support for an hourly rate. So then we started just, like, someone would send us a thesis and I would just do, even if it was sitting outside shops or, talking to customers, setting up like Survey Monkeys, whatever it may be, and got them like an on-the-ground perspective of what was happening in these businesses so that they could better, validate. Well, it was essentially thesis validation.
Yeah.
They wanted to know that they were right. And that's where I started working with Iden, because he was studying at RMIT with me at the time. And he was in engineering. And there were a couple of like mining companies that came our way. And I had no idea what I was doing. I was so far over my head in terms of like geographical reports and, mining feasibility. And so I asked him, I was like, hey, do you want to help out with some of this more like mathy engineering related stuff? I'm sure you might have fun with it. And we'd known each other since primary school. So we were friends since we were 8, I think.
Okay.
So, it kind of took off from there. And then we started doing some of this work collaboratively. And I think once we started to see that some of our work had played out and that we were like very correct in our thesis, it was that time that we figured it actually might be better off that we do the work ourselves and develop our own thesis, even as a proof of concept, so that we can sort of move into this industry. Because that was the end goal, right? When we started doing this, it was like, I want to work in funds management. And it kind of didn't play out that way, obviously, because once Viceroy kicked off and once we met Fraser, and it was during that time where we were doing some work for people and they asked us to look into I think it was TFS.
Quintus.
Yeah. I was speaking to someone and like going through a thesis with them that we'd sort of semi come up with. And they said, oh, I know another guy that's looking into the same company as you. And they patched in Fraser on that call. And I think me and Fraser spoke for 5 hours. And I was like, yeah, this guy just doesn't stop talking. But, he's pretty interesting, so I'll give him the time of the day. And then he accidentally sent me an email from his anonymous outfit at the time, Zatara, and kind of said, oh, shit, wasn't meant to tell you what it was. And I think after Zatara kind of backfired, we just started working together as Viceroy. And we sort of just started talking. He was like, hey, look, we have some great ideas. Why don't we just start Viceroy? And he said, cool. And then that's how we started. So it was really strange because we're very like non-traditional backgrounds. Fraser's background's in social services.
Yeah.
I didn't engineering. I'm sort of financy. But none of us had any funds experience before. It was just like we were willing to spend 1 month on an idea, whereas most funds are rolling between at least 10, 15 ideas per person.
Yeah.
So the depth that we can cover was much greater. And I think that was always our value add.
Yeah. So just circling back to when you started things and you started approaching these funds, were they pretty receptive to were they entertaining the idea that they might have someone like you go out and validate their thesis?
It happens a lot, I'd say. In the US, it was really easy because there's a lot of PI work that is purely I think the hedge fund industry definitely, keeps up the standard with the cost of PIs over there. But in Australia, I don't think that there's many people that actually do that still. I don't think there's anyone that does sort of this due diligence support. And we're not PIs, obviously, but it's easy enough to sit outside a shop and count people going in and out on a weekday. And if it was retail, find out half when they're having sales and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll get to that in a moment. I'm sure you'll have some stories for us there.
Yeah.
So you met Fraser, and he's not based in Australia, right?
No, he's in London.
Yeah, right. So you're kind of all over the world.
But he's 50% London, 50% New York.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I think for context and for some listeners who may not have a full appreciation for what you do, maybe you can just give us this short selling 101, what it is and how it differs from traditional investing.
So short selling is very similar to long investing, but instead of betting on the stock price appreciating, you're betting on the stock price depreciating. And it's like borrowing money from a bank. So if I borrow a share from, you, I would sell that share immediately, and let's say it was worth $100. And I'm betting on that share value decreasing. So if it decreases to $50, I'd buy it back on the market and return you your share. So I'm not actually borrowing a nominal amount of money. I'm borrowing nominal amount of shares.
Yep.
And then I pay interest on those shares to you while you loan them to me, similar to a bank.
So from my perspective, lending you the share makes sense because I was going to hold it anyway.
Sure.
But I might get some sort of interest.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. One other little question. Why is it called Viceroy?
Okay, so we were looking... This is really difficult to come up with a name, actually. But we were looking at, instances of big bubbles. And I think the most prominent example, or one of the earliest documented examples, was the tulip bubble in the Netherlands. And it was essentially the Ottomans bought tulips to the Netherlands, and they started trading the bulbs as like a commodity almost. So the price of a bulb would be somewhere in the region of the price of a house or someone's annual income. And I think once they figured out that you can just grow these things in mass, the prices of tulip bulbs collapsed. And the most expensive type of tulip, or amongst the most expensive, was the Viceroy. And it had a disease that made the petals stripy. So if you actually see our logo, the petals have a stripe on it. So they don't exist anymore.
Huh.
So that was the name.
Okay, that's the genesis of the name.
Although actually, I spoke to Joe at Jolly Swagman podcast, and he told me that like my facts on the Dutch tulip bubble were totally wrong. So I might actually have to take a lesson from him on that one.
Okay. It's a good story anyway, right? That's what this is all about.
Exactly.
So I suppose one of the reports that really put you guys on the map was the report about Steinhoff International, which is a South African company, furniture retailer as far as I know, sold all around the world, one of the biggest companies in South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Can you take us through your process, starting from due diligence right through to, I suppose, today, what happened?
Sure.
Yeah, I think it'd just be a fascinating story.
So from due diligence, I think it came up on the map when Steinhoff had proposed to buy a mattress firm in the US. And that stuck out to Fraser because I hadn't been to the US that much at the time. It stuck out to Fraser because he's like, I've never seen anyone in those stores. How much money do they make and why are they paying so much for it? And it was just like this huge valuation. I don't know exactly what it is off the top of my head, but it seemed like it was inflated like 2 or 3 times.
Right.
And it was a related party transaction with, if I recall, Christoph Weiser, who was the chairman and majority holder of Steinhoff at the time. And I think once we sort of started looking into that, we got into this web of really, really intricate undisclosed related parties that we would just find everywhere. And just weird sort of transactions that didn't really amount to like huge sums of money on their financials, but once you aggregated all of these, it was quite substantial in terms of their earnings.
Mm-hmm.
So when sort of months and months into like pulling out financials from all of these really, really difficult jurisdictions, Europe, I think Bahamas, the US, some in Germany, and even like a lot of these companies in South Africa, we found that, a big driver of Steinhoff sales, especially in South Africa, was this sort of consumer financing for furniture. And it looked like all of the debt from the consumer financing in South Africa was just sort of being offloaded for cash. But when we got the filings to see where it was going, it actually looked like Steinhoff was giving a loan to someone to buy the bad debt. And I don't think that there was any intention to ever repay that loan.
Right.
And that in itself amounted to like a huge portion of earnings, even though like it wasn't really substantial in the grand scheme of like revenue.
Yep.
So
you went into each of these jurisdictions, you were just finding this complex web of companies, effectively shell companies, or?
Yeah, and there were a few, and there were a few that sort of, once we started kind of poking this idea, we get these anonymous emails that will come and be like, I heard you guys were talking to someone about this. Here's what I found. And, we had found one related party and there was another one that was sent to us on an email. And collectively, I don't think that was potentially all of them, because we didn't anticipate publishing our report when we did. It was just like, it was as it was on the date that PwC quit and Marcus Braun quit, that the stock collapsed, and we figured, well, shit, may as well publish now, because I'm not going to keep working on this. The thesis is played out. So I think from our end, it was still incomplete. And there still potentially could be more digging done. But the state of affairs now is that, they're sort of dragging them through this regulatory process in a bunch of offices in South Africa. But I haven't been following it, super closely.
Mm. And so I think I looked this up before I came in, and I think the share price is down something like 90% or more.
Yeah, I think it was a bit more.
Yeah, right. So how big was this company? Like, what would it be akin to here in Australia?
I think it was like 16 billion euros, wasn't it?
Right.
So massive.
Yeah, I think I checked it was about 350 million euros, I think, now.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Don't quote me on the 16 billion. I think it was very, very big. It would be like putting JB Hi-Fi, Harvey Norman, and like all of our financial retailers into like a cluster and listing it.
Yeah, right.
So pretty big.
Yeah, right. And naturally, the fallout from this has been huge, especially in South Africa, obviously, because this is a massive company that's...
Right, and there was a lot of like pension cash invested in it as well.
And banks, international banks that were invested...
Banks. And it wasn't... There was one sell-side analyst only that was putting out, I think, negative notes on this company.
Okay.
From memory. And they were so poorly received, even though they were factually right. And it wasn't like super difficult to do the proper due diligence on this. It was time consuming, but even like inspecting the quality of earnings is like an easy thing to do. So the quality of like the cash that's coming in, and the quality of your customers, especially when you're giving out like unsecured debt for people to buy your stuff. That's like a really easy, risk adjustment.
Was that disclosed in the statements?
I mean, yeah, they had a breakdown of how much of their loan book went out to as unsecured debt. Right. But this guy turned out to be right, and all of these buy-side analysts who had been, continuously like, yeah, this is a great company, blah blah blah. That's fine. They did their research. It wasn't, factually right, but the regulatory process that we sort of endured in South Africa on our piece was pretty crazy, considering that everyone kind of dislikes short sellers or people that write negative reports, when in reality, if we treated buy reports with the same scrutiny, I think that'd be a very, very different outcome in terms of like how people perceive investment research.
For sure. I mean, everyone's happy to keep the wagon rolling until...
Right.
Like, they're employed, they're making money. And
exactly.
No one likes to lose money, right?
No, and that's... Yeah, I think you have to kind of get the emotion out of that and just actually look at this thing fundamentally. Like, what does this business do?
It seems like, talking to you now, it seems like you remember it. It was a big event, obviously, but it sounds like there have been quite a few since then.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's one thing I wanted to touch on with you is you having a look at the Viceroy website and then all of the reports that have been issued. You seem to go across geographies, industries, thematics. It's just pretty much everything you seem to cover. Like you mentioned mining before. You mentioned Quintus, which was that sandalwood producer. Yep. How do these ideas come to you?
It sounds really dumb, but I think when we start looking at ideas, it's too good to be true.
Okay.
But we don't actively go out looking for short investments. We don't actively go out looking for crappy companies. I think our process is the same whether we go long or short. And we have long positions. We just don't think it's worth publishing, But the process is really, really exactly the same. And when we start looking at things like, I don't know, if it was Quintus or Steinhoff. It was more like, okay, this business seems that they're promising so much, but I don't see it. Like, this is not reflected in cash. And once you look at, okay, we're promising, I mean, this was managed investment schemes generally, right? Like, I don't think there's any managed investment schemes that are still running, especially forestry ones. So when someone says, okay, you can buy a plot of land, and we're going to put trees on it, and in 15 years, these trees are going to be worth a lot of money, and then you're going to get a commission from the sale as an alternative of raising capital from shareholders. You really want to be sure that this is like a commodity that you can price like very accurately in 15 years, because if it's worth garbage, you're not going to get paid, right? You're paying these guys to put trees there. But like things like sandalwood, it's not really, there's no sort of, you can't go on CapIQ and type in price of sandalwood and expect, this very, very detailed graph of like massive volumes of sandalwood being sold and being very, very documented. So that was, that's one of the really, really hard parts of doing that kind of work, is you actually have to go find someone that's willing to buy sandalwood, which is not that many people. And someone that's putting it up against someone that's multiple times supplying the global volume of sandalwood and expecting the price to be the same.
That seems like such a simple thing to do, right? To find the disconnect between
in
expectations and
hindsight,
reality, right? Yeah, in hindsight,
right? But that's always been the issue, right? Like in hindsight, this is very obvious. It's always that, right? And in hindsight, Enron was very obviously a fraud.
Yeah.
Right.
But I suppose the challenge for you is not finding the worst companies and shorting them, because everyone already knows that the worst companies. It's finding that change, right? The change from that expectation to the reality.
Right.
Can you draw on any other examples, even recent ones, with companies that you've researched or come across that might fit that bill?
I think we did a report on a company called ProSiebenSat, which is a German free-to-air sort of TV network. And they did this thing where they essentially started building a portfolio of e-commerce businesses because of this widely publicized case that free-to-air TV is dead within a period of time, because no one watches it. Like, I watch Netflix.
Yeah, me too.
Exactly. And in sort of an attempt to branch out from their pure play free-to-air business, they built this e-commerce and startup sort of venture on the site, which actually grew substantially on its books. And the way they did that was offering advertisements on their network for equity, and as opposed to cash, because a lot of these startups don't really have the money to. It was a pretty smart idea, right? Like, a lot of these businesses don't have cash to do the advertising themselves, so we'll give you equity, but we want airtime.
Yeah.
And it created an issue where it was, I think from our understanding, it was very difficult to price this, because the price wasn't really based on, how much this business was actually worth, in our opinion. I think what we found was that, if you put them in a really expensive time slot and you get 10% of the equity, and let's say that time slot is worth $10 million, you've got a $100 million business. Whereas realistically, that's totally subjective which time slot you give them.
For sure. And if you control the
network. And then once you start, and there were hundreds of these. So when we started going through all these little businesses in that portfolio, and we found heaps that were in liquidation, that were bankrupt, some of them that didn't really exist in substance. among some other ones which actually were fine. You know, like I think they own eHarmony or a bit of eHarmony or something like that.
Right.
I mean, once you start going through those, you can see like the value is not really there for a lot of these like small time businesses. And while this was happening, the TV business was still deteriorating. So like we put out a report and said, you can't pin the hopes of this business on this sort of venture capital portfolio that they're starting, because the quality of the businesses that are coming through here don't seem that great, and it seems to be like a very subjective valuation where they're just giving them time slots to like create this arbitrary book value. And then if your time slots increase the next year or the next time you get more equity from them, you earn a profit like on the books. Right? It's not cash because it's never going to come through as cash unless you sell the business, because they don't generate cash generally.
It seems like with this business, and you've already brought Steinhoff and Quintus with the sandalwood, it sounds like these businesses, if you were to use a finance jargon, they've got some off-balance sheet risk, or there's asset risk there. There's these hidden liabilities matched with expectations. So I wonder if you could look at this quantitatively, and over your time doing this since the early days of Ferry Hodgson, are there some commonalities or some heuristics that you use now to speed up the process and understand the businesses? Yeah. Because I'm thinking like inflated asset values, low cash conversion, etc.
Okay, so like the biggest thing I think for us is if you have good earnings and they don't translate to cash, then there's a problem. If your dividends are supported by debt or equity raises, it's probably a big problem. And I think that's what we kind of go through when we look at quality of earnings. So, I mean, for our perspective, if we want to go for a long, we don't look for businesses that are, I mean, especially if we want to look for like a very, very stable long, like a company that's growing well. It's making good earnings on the product that's already selling. You can see the cash actually coming through, and they're raising debt to fund expansion. And the expansion is sort of, there's a tangible value that's being created, you know, on earnings year on year. But when it starts getting to things like, and this is like why I think REITs are really difficult to price, is because they're raising a lot of debt, they're raising a lot of equity, and a lot of the profits come from upward revaluation of property. So there's not really any cash coming in besides maybe like rent, but it's so minimal on your bottom line compared to the value of the properties that once you kind of start snowballing debt and backing it against these values, it's just very, very difficult to realistically say like, oh yeah, like every single REIT in Australia can sell their properties for this much if they needed to. But I'll leave that for someone that's better at valuing property than me. I'm not that good.
If you were to think about it today, how much would you be net short? Like, would you have more of your exposure short than long?
I don't know. I think for us is like we like to be short for events.
Okay.
So, and this is that big Tesla question. And do you know Mark Cohodes, or do you know of Mark Cohodes?
Know of, yeah.
Yeah, so he's always saying like, you know, this jaguar on the tree thing. It's like you don't want to go in for the fight. You just want to wait until this jaguar's fallen off the tree so you can go in for the kill kind of thing. And I think that's always been the case. And he's attributed this to like Tesla, right? And Tesla is super controversial.
Yeah.
On one side, you have these guys on Twitter relentlessly going after this company with really, really good data to support them. And, you know, you have a CEO that's sort of, he's eccentric to say the least. And, you know, overpromises, gets in trouble with the SEC all the time, calls guys pedos and all this other crap. And always is promoting something new with Tesla, and there's this sort of entrepreneurial like mindset where like I'm going to start a new project before I finish my first one kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And it keeps going, and it created this cult really where there's so many people that love Elon Musk and love Tesla, and they own a car, and even when the car is like garbage, they will still, you know, complain. Like if you look at complaints on Tesla, it's great because it's like it always starts like, "Hi Elon, love Tesla and love your work, but my car won't start. The boot's leaking water. You know, I get a flat tire every 3 months, whatever. And the service center hasn't responded to any of my queries for 2 months. Can you please help?" And it's so obscure. Like if I bought a $35,000 car, like US dollar car, I'd be pissed off if my trunk was leaking and like no one responded to my service requests. And it's not like you can take it to any shop, right? Like you can't. It's a Tesla. It's their own thing. They have to do it themselves, kind of. So it's like owning a Mac. You just have to take it to a genius. But the geniuses are there. Whereas Tesla, they don't really have. I'm sure there's some geniuses, but they're not going to fix your car really quick.
Okay, and so
and that's So that's like what's really hard, because you have such like a huge cultist community that love this guy. So why would you want to like go short right now? And it's working for them. Like the short's been pretty good over the last year. I think it's down from like 300 and something to 230 now or something like that. Yeah, I mean, the short's great. And the short argument, in my opinion, is flawless. But the fight is not really worth it for us. For
the way I look at short selling is you have to have your thesis. Mm-hmm. So you have to be right about the company, but you also have to be right about the timing. So there has to be a catalyst, like you said.
Right.
And you have to be aware that who's on that shareholder registry, or you know, the liquidity in the market, it might not be as straightforward as this is a dodgy company, I've exposed it, now fall.
Yeah.
It might actually stay there for a long time, and in that time,
right,
you know, it's not working out for you as the short seller.
And there's also times like I was listening to the Jolly Swagman podcast with John Hempton the other day, and John was like, "Do you know Briex?
No.
This is mine in I don't know, Southeast Asia somewhere.
Yeah, right.
And it was a huge gold mine. It was going to be the biggest gold mine in the world. And we based a lot of one of our thesis on one of our mines on this company. And the geological sampling was done because like one of the executives went out and bought like gold from like these guys panning for gold in the river and literally sprinkled it over the sample size. And once that was sort of blown apart, right? Because actually, like one of their geographical, the feasibility guys came in. It was Strathcona, and they did the same thing at this other company in Canada. They came in and said the gold doesn't exist, and the stock dropped 90% on the day. And you know, John was saying, yeah, the easiest money you could have made on that stock wasn't like riding this thing up until Strathcona told everyone that, you know, Briex doesn't have any gold. It was probably right after the 90% drop, because there's still no gold, and it's still worth like $3 billion. So I don't know. I don't think, you know, it's not a missed opportunity after it's already fallen 90%, because it's still going to go another 100. Right?
Yeah, of course it can, right? That's interesting. So because I've heard of some really good short sellers. Obviously, it's a pretty tight community. There's not too many high-profile short sellers in the country, and I've heard of other short sellers not jumping on the bandwagon, but you get the idea. They know that someone else has taken this position, read the report, and they've gone, "Oh, okay," effectively. Almost like that's a big part of the due diligence, if you like. Let's just take a small position. Is that something like? Do you guys have like a community that you talk to, or other short sellers?
It's actually like of no benefit to short sellers to share any of their ideas, despite the fact that like everyone thinks we're in some sort of cabal or a wolf pack. That gets thrown around a lot. And
I think I had Hit Squad.
Hit Squad, I got Hit Squad. The reason is, like, if we go around and tell all of our buddies that we're going to go short a company, every single person is going to put in a short position. And the borrow will get extremely expensive before we're in position. And it essentially, like, financially for us, it makes no sense. It's not in anyone's interest, actually. Like, it's not in, I mean, if the borrower is like at 50% and the stock tanks before we even published our report, it's more likely than not that there'll be like some sort of short squeeze, right? Because everyone's going to try exit the position. So no, we talk about our ideas after the fact, sure, but we do that with a lot of people, not just the other activist shorts. But yeah, it's a weird environment. Like I went to like a dinner with a bunch of other like activist shorts, and like everyone's sort of really quiet and just look at each other. And everyone's like, "Oh, what are you working on?" I was like, "Oh, just this weird company,
stocks."
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think you just mentioned like the perception from the outside is probably that the short selling side of investing is the Wild West. Mm-hmm. I mean, I imagine you'd have some sort of rebuttal for that in terms of improving efficiency in the market or something like that.
I think so. I mean, I think it's not like some holier than thou kind of quest, but it's really I think it's just more that it's the adrenaline you get from figuring out something that no one else has figured out is great. And when there's like, bad people doing bad things, as corny as it may sound, it's good to sort of create this. I mean, you're not really creating a narrative. You're just explaining to people that this is happening so that, hopefully the market can correct itself. And I mean, we've done that with MyMedics, right? I mean, it was a bit of a strange company, but the amount of crazy things that these guys were doing that we think was totally like below the belt.
Can you explain the business and the thesis?
I think at its core, the thesis was, I mean, we really picked up on it because they started going after a bunch of whistleblowers.
As in former employees?
Former employees.
Yeah.
And we don't think that's right, because if they're whistleblowers and they're trying to, even if they have a perception of wrongdoing, it should still be addressed, and you shouldn't really go out and sue them for defamation and libel. The main crux of the thesis is that there is this product for diabetic leg wounds and another sort of amniotic fluid injection you can get for pretty much apparently anything,
right?
Including hair loss and like, I don't know. They literally inject it anywhere by the sounds of it, and there's very tenuous, in our opinion, clinical trials that have been conducted on this. And we found instances where there were employee-owned distributorships and physician-owned distributorships, which creates an environment that's hefty with kickbacks. And I think it's unfair to say that MyMedics is the only only company that's doing kickbacks in the US. I think that the US healthcare system is like insane. Because if you hire salespeople to sell crap to doctors, you're never going to like get into this environment of self-interest where people are like, I'll sell your product, but I want what's in it for me kind of thing. And then you get like those crazy dinners when like, I think stuff happens in movies, like they take you to a strip club or something. I'm not sure how it works, but the whole idea of it is backwards. They should just use the product that works, right? Yeah. And we got a lot of backlash from the company. And it was just, I mean, we put up 20-something reports. I think if I was to explain the thesis, we'd be here for hours.
Okay.
But there's a summary that we put up that's worth a read. I'll shoot you the link if you want to put it up on your website later. But that was one of like the most long-winded piece of analysis we've ever done.
Right.
It dragged on for like a year, I think, since we were at the first to the last piece.
Right. So maybe if I can summarize, basically this therapy doesn't work.
Well, it depends who you ask. I can't say it doesn't work, but I can say that the clinical trials are very inconclusive.
Okay.
And that's not just my opinion, but if you look at when these guys try to branch out to the UK, and the UK independently, it has like a review of all the clinical studies that the company's done before they approve it in the market. And these guys basically came up and said, there's no independent clinical studies. Also, they were, but they were scrapped. Why did that happen? So
yeah,
it's weird. And there's pictures flying around, and the company had it up on its website that they've had 0 adverse effects to any of these products before, which appears to be a lie, because when you go on Twitter, you can see pictures of people with like huge like wounds that have been like infected or worse because, you know, something wasn't sterile or the thing doesn't work. But to come out and say that there's no adverse effects is, you know, also a bit shady.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And there's so much. There's FDA reports that like the facilities weren't sterile and blah blah blah.
Okay. Well, I'll put the link in the show notes for those who are intrigued by this. So, what would you say to people who think that maybe releasing the reports, you know, maybe if they would say you releasing reports is hugely conflicted or creates some sort of ethical question about why you're doing it. Do you ever get that?
Yeah. I don't think that it's any different from Goldman releasing a report on a company that all their clients heavily invested in and saying it's a massive long.
Okay. That's fair enough.
Yeah.
That's probably the rebuttal that I hear most to that point. And
yeah.
I think there is an argument to be had there for efficiency and all the rest of it. And like you say, there's often conflicts with buy-side reports.
Right. And for us, it's not... I think there was this sort of false narrative that when we were anonymous, we were unaccountable to regulators. But the reality is that we lodged our reports with every single whistleblower channel with the regulators, with all of our details prior to publishing any report we did when we were anonymous. So they had a very good idea of who we were.
Okay,
and part of that is because the US has a great whistleblower reward program.
Right.
But also part of it is because like there's something happening here and they should be aware about it.
When you say whistleblower reward program, what do you mean?
So if you're a whistleblower in the United States, you're afforded whistleblower protection, which basically means like they'll investigate the case and you'll be anonymous, whatever. If they can then prosecute the company for damages or a fine, the whistleblower is entitled to a percentage of that fine.
Right.
So, and some of them have been huge, like in the tens of millions of dollars. Some whistleblowers have gotten for lodging a claim.
Wow.
But the kicker is, I mean, if they do go to trial and need testimony, then you obviously can't remain anonymous. But you know, for $10 million, laughing.
Yeah. So that brings up an interesting point, which is the differences between here in Australia and elsewhere. How does that? Can you explain for people that don't know how maybe some of what your understanding of the defamation laws and different, I suppose, oversight that we face here in Australia?
I think for publication it's really difficult because we don't have anti-slap.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for.
So in the US, we always publish from the US every time we do stuff. And that's just because in the US, you're essentially not allowed to sue someone to bankrupt them. So you'd have to go to the court, and the court has to basically approve your case. You have to basically prove that you have a winnable case before you take someone to a jury trial.
Right. So if I was to release a report here in Australia, someone could sue me until the nth degree, and I'm bankrupt. So I can't defend.
It's almost innocent until bankrupt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And so do you physically get on a plane and go over to the States?
Yep. The commute sucks.
I'm sure you do other things while you're over there.
Sure, yeah. Do other things. Yeah.
Okay. You brought up an interesting point before about being anonymous. I haven't brought that up yet. Viceroy, from my understanding, was anonymous. No one knew who you were. There was speculation. And I was surprised when it turned out that you're in my own backyard, effectively. Right. Can you describe the process of how and who found out who you really were?
Yeah.
And then how you felt when you realised that you were going to be exposed?
Yeah. I think it was actually Johnny Shapiro found out from the AFR. And, you know, I was probably a bit of an arsehole actually when he reached out to me and said, hey, you're Viceroy. And I was like, no, I don't want to be part of whatever agenda it is that you're writing about. So I was kind of a bit of a jerk actually when he found out, probably because I was terrified.
Yep.
But the way he found out was that there's metadata that was left in our report, and it had my name on it, on one of them. And then
when you say metadata, for people that don't know,
it's basically like, I mean, it's not like my name's not written on the report, but if you look at the properties of the document, and like I think it was the author of a picture or something in the document was.
So
me.
You've got this picture, you've inserted it in a document, which has then been uploaded.
Yeah, and then if you scan the back end of the document almost, it's got my name on it. And then if you had searched up my name at the time, it was me, Fraser, and Iden in a business together in the UK, which is public record. Mm-hmm. And Fraser had already been known as like Zatara at this point.
Right.
So I think it was at that stage pretty obvious.
Join the dots kind of thing.
Yeah. And yeah, it was terrifying because I didn't really know what to expect. And we got a lot of like support. I think I got like hundreds of emails that day, being like, "Oh, you guys do great work. Don't worry about all the crap." But yeah, there was no doubt, like with all the, I guess, shit stirring that we did, that there was going to be some bad press, and there was. So and it was strange, right? Because I mean, Fraser was a social worker. I was 23, I think 23 or 24. Arden was 24. So it was a bit surreal, and I think that people thought we were sort of charlatans. And then it was only sort of after the fact that, you know, after sort of we kept writing up great stuff, and then it's sort of kind of flipped, and now I think people are okay with 225-year-olds like telling them that this stock's crap.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's put ourselves in your shoes. You've written about these companies overseas, these huge companies, even some close to home, and they've collapsed effectively. Mm-hmm. When I was doing my prep for the show, I was talking to people saying, like, this is real money that people. You know, they don't care who is responsible. They just want to know because their stock has gone from $1 to 5 cents. Mm-hmm. They want someone to be responsible. So I was thinking that would be pretty daunting to be the one that everyone is focusing on, not the actual issue, but they're focusing on you.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you never know who's going to come knocking on your door. Do you ever worry about that?
Yeah, people have rocked up to like my parents' house.
Really?
Yeah. We had like people trying to serve us, debt collectors.
Yeah, right. Quote unquote,
knocking at, you know, leaving cards and stuff in our doors. But it was, I think for like a good month, I was just a wreck, and we got sued that month as well by my medics, which was eventually dropped, and now we're suing them back. But at the time, it was just like so overwhelming because I had very little like recourse at what I could do if, you know, things really turned south. But it turned out fine. And then at that point, I would just stop feeling sorry for myself and was actually just start going back to work, and it was great. And now I think that there is an inflection point where it's probably safer to be public than private, because like if some crazy did find out who it was and came after me, I think it'd be very difficult to explain to people why. And I think that was the issue with Fraser as well, because after Zatara leaks happened, which was his previous anonymous outfit, he got stuffed in the back of a car and kidnapped.
Right. And
told to like never write about this company again.
Right.
So he just wrote more, which is great.
So what did you what?
That was weird for me as well, because I thought that would happen to me when I was like public. But then I think the more you think about it, it's like if something really did happen to me, it'd probably be really bad. I mean, it's very obvious why to a degree, but no, it's a bit creepy. I think it happens to a lot of the other short sellers as well. To be honest, they get it's a short seller treatment. It's not good.
Yeah. So did you put anything in place when you knew that you were going to be exposed? Did you change addresses? Did you postal addresses? Anything like that? Like
no, we'd already thought of that beforehand. So yeah, I mean we were registered to like a virtual office essentially.
Yeah.
But it's still creepy.
For sure.
Yeah.
Because and these companies, once again, they're motivated, right? They have. Mm-hmm. They'll do whatever. They have whatever means available to them, and they'll pursue them.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But I mean, historically, it hasn't been a very good idea to sue short sellers. Just ask Mark Cody's. It just never turns out well.
Yeah, I suppose once you get to a certain status and experience.
Yeah, because I mean, we don't really have anything tied.
Yeah. Yeah, you're quite happy for it to be made.
Sure, yeah. Take us to Discovery. It's great. We get all your files.
And it sounds like you've had some experience with this recently.
Yep.
For me, that would on the opposite side of the ledger. That would be pretty. I'd be petrified, to be honest. But,
yeah, it's pretty daunting.
Yeah,
but it's good. I think. I didn't really expect it. 20-something to get sued, but. Now I'm just more comfortable. Not comfortable with the idea, but if it happens, at least sort of we know where we stand.
You'd have to have legal teams, right?
Yeah, we have a lawyer.
Here in Australia or overseas?
In the US.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So we're registered over there.
Right.
Well, yeah, we're registered over there.
Yeah, okay. And as we come to the back of the conversation, there's just for people that want to follow along with some of your research, where would they go?
Mm-hmm. Best place is probably on Twitter.
Yeah, you're on Twitter personally, right?
I'm on Twitter personally. It's Gabe_Bernarde. I'm sure you can put up the link.
Yeah, definitely.
And Viceroy is also on Twitter. It's at Viceroy Research.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Twitter is generally like the best financial news source.
Agreed.
For like live stuff. And if you get a good sort of, I don't know, not overwhelmingly high number of followers, because otherwise it's just like your newsfeed just becomes a dump. But if you get like 100, 200 or so good people that put out decent updates of your interest, then yeah, it's great. It's all live. And it was so strange because like when we started Viceroy, we put out stuff on Twitter just because like everyone else was doing it. And then like Mark Cody's followed us. I thought it was like the hottest shit ever. Yeah, it's great. And then, then I ended up going to his farm and like drinking rum punch with him. It's fun. But it's really easy to start, discussions with people that are really knowledgeable about certain things, and most people are really happy to do it. So, definitely recommend Twitter.
Yeah, cool. I'll put that link in the show notes. Mate, this is the last question.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a standard one. If you could go back and tell a younger you, you're pretty young anyway, but if you could tell a younger you one thing about money, finance, or investing.
Oh, geez, probably don't get into short selling. I don't know. I think it's... Maybe I'll have a better answer for you in a few years.
Okay.
I think it's still early days. Yeah.
Well, I'm more than happy to revisit in a few years then.
Yeah,
it'll be interesting to see where Viceroy and yourself are in a few years.
Exactly.
All right, mate. Well, thanks for joining me on the show.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.